just at the hearth beside the blazing fire, while all the rest stayed hushed, stock still. And then all of a sudden we've got the Reverend Aeschines who will say to Alcinous, hey, this is absolutely no way to treat a stranger. Raise him up, seat the stranger, and show Xenia. That is to say, if we're going to honor and respect Zeus, who is the god of Xenia, proper guest-host relationship, then we have to make sure that we do this. Supplicants' rights are sacred in Phaeacia, he reminds his king. Alcinous then will raise up Odysseus. He will displace his own son to sit Odysseus there. They feed Odysseus. Wine for everyone is served at line 210. The libations are poured out. And then at line 220, Alcinous is ready to speak. And he says this, hear me, lords and captains of Phaeacia. Hear what the heart inside me has to say. Now, our feast finished. Home you go to sleep. This is interesting. Let's pause for a moment and point out. Alcinous can feed people and send them home, and they will obey. Opposite to what's happening in Ithaca with those suitors and poor Telemachus. He tried to send them home. They got no interest in it. Notice Athena had to kind of make them go home through some of her magic, right? But Alcinous continues. At dawn, we call the elders into full assembly, host our guests in the palace, sacrifice to the gods, and then we turn our minds to his passage home. So under our convoy, our new friend can travel back to his own land. No toil, no troubles, soon rejoicing, even if his home's a world away. By the way, the no toil, no trouble, it will happen for the Phaeacians. They are going to get punished by Poseidon for doing this work of Xenia. But here, we're going to take care of him. And on the way, no pain or hardship suffered, not till he sets foot on native ground again. Of course, we know what's coming is there will be all kinds of pain and suffering that will happen once he does set foot on ground of Ithaca, right? So we then have the comment made to continue where he will say, there in the future, about Odysseus, he says, he must suffer all that fate, and the overbearing spinner spun out on his lifeline the very day his mother gave him birth. This idea of the three goddesses who, of course, are in charge of fate and all of that, right? Alcinous will say, but if he's one of the deathless powers out of the blue, right, the gods, he says, are working now in strange new ways. Why, always up to now, they came to us face to face. Significant because in Homer, most of the time, gods do not come face to face with humans. One more way to say that the island of the Phaeacians is this amazing place where the gods, to continue here, he says, whenever we give them grand, glorious sacrifices, they always sat beside us here and shared our feasts. Even when some lonely traveler meets them on the roads, they never disguise themselves. We're too close kin for that. Close as the wild giants are, the Cyclops too. It will then be Odysseus who will say at line 243, Alcinous, weary Odysseus countered, cross that thought from your mind. I'm nothing like the immortal gods who rule the skies, either in build or breeding. I'm just a mortal man. So let's say it now for our notes. Throughout the rest of the Odyssey, certainly from this book, maybe even earlier, this question of who is Odysseus? Who are you? He's a stranger. How he will share that information is always interesting. Notice here he says, I'm no god, I'm just a mortal man, right? He says, whom do you know most saddled down with sorrow? They are the ones I'd equal, grief for grief. And I could tell a tale of still more hardship, all I've suffered, thanks to the God's will. Two observations here. Here in a second, he will tell a very brief tale. He'll briefly outline. He'll not give away much information. Later, though, he will, in fact, begin his story at the end of 8, and then, of course, book 9. 9 through 12 will be his famous flashback story. The story, of course, is the heart of the Odyssey itself, right? But, despite my misery, let me finish dinner. And then he says this. This is a fascinating line, and it's going to inform our reading of Odysseus in the Iliad. Just to remind, we don't have a lot of Odysseus in the Iliad. I mean, we have a couple of stories about him. He goes off, of course, with Diomedes, and he jacks Dolan and cuts off his head and a few things like that. Most of the time, though, that we have Odysseus, it is in relationship to Achilles. And you'll remember that he and Achilles, well, Achilles was ready to go and fight immediately the Trojans after the killing of Patroclus. You'll remember it was Odysseus that said, no, let's eat first. Why? For Odysseus, it's always about his belly. Famous lines here coming now at line 250 of book 7 of the Odyssey. He says it, the belly's a shameless dog. There's nothing worse. Always insisting, pressing, it never lets us forget. Destroyed as I am, my heart racked with sadness, sick with anguish, still keeps demanding. His stomach, eat, drink. It blocks out all the memory of my pain, commanding, fill me up. But you, at the first light of day, hurry, please, to set your unlucky guest on his home soil. How much I have suffered. Oh, just let me see my lands, my serving men in the grand high-roofed house. Then I can die in peace. Of course, this notion of what it is that Odysseus wants to see. And sight is a very interesting motif throughout the entire Odyssey, right? Think about the fact that Polyphemus will be blinded, correct? Okay. Sight is important in the same way that, for example, we'll play that game when we talk about Plato's cave allegory of Book 7 of Republic and the notion of perspicacity and insight and all of that, right? As soon as he finishes, we're told at line 263, all burst into applause, right? They all leave, again, unlike the suitors, correct? And very interestingly, we're told that Arete will look at Odysseus and the way he's dressed, and she will begin to ask the question at line 271, stranger, we're told brusquely and sharply, she asks, she's a woman who's obviously watching close, stranger, I'll be the first to question you myself. Who are you? I told you this is a common question. Who are you? Where are you from? Who gave you the clothes you're wearing now? Didn't you say you reached us roving on the sea? Notice then the response. What hard labor, queen, the man of craft replied. To tell you the story of my troubles, to go back to an earlier line, right? Start to finish, right? In other words, he says, it would be so hard for me to tell you the full story. The gods on high have given me my share. Still, this much I will tell you, seeing you probe and press me so intently. So in other words, he tells his story. It's interesting what he tells. It's interesting what he leaves out. He says that, first of all, he starts with Calypso. He was cursed by a beautiful woman 10 days out at sea after he's allowed to leave. The goddess, he said, took me in all her kindness after he had been shipwrecked on the island. She never, however, was able to win his heart, he says, right? 7 endless years, he said, he was there. And, of course, this will lead then to him saying, finally he was allowed to leave. 18 days at sea, Poseidon, he tells them, Poseidon has it out for me. The god of earthquakes piled up on me, loosing the winds against me at line 310. It does beg the question why the Phaeacians wouldn't ask, why is Poseidon so against you? To kind of, at least for self-preservation, they might have asked. They don't, right? And then finally he says, I washed up onto your island, I slept in the leaves, and then in line 330 he says, sweet sleep set me free. And I looked up, and there your daughter's maids at play on the beach, and she moved among them, he compliments their daughter, like a deathless goddess. He again mentions the possibility of Artemis. I begged her for help, and not once did her sense of tact desert her, so he compliments their daughter. Right? She behaved as you'd never hope to find in one so young, not in a random meeting. Time and again, the youngsters prove so flighty. We're going to hear about this more in the next book. Alcinous has maybe a flighty son or two. Not she. She gave me food aplenty, shining wine, a bath in the river too, and gave me all this clothing. That's my whole story, wrenching to tell, but true. It will be the king who responds now and says, but in one regard, my friend, the king said, her good sense missed the mark. This daughter of mine, she never escorted you to her house with all her maids, but she was the first you asked for care and shelter. Diplomatic Odysseus, we're told, answers, Your Majesty, don't find fault with a flawless daughter now. Not for my sake, please. She urged me herself to follow with her maids. He kind of changes the story. I chose not to, fearing embarrassment. In fact, what if you took offense, seeing us both together? Suspicious we were, we men who walk the earth. In other words, I didn't want you to assume that I might think that I was interested in your daughter. He responds, Alcinous, oh no, my friend, he says. I'm hardly a man for reckless, idle anger. And then he says an interesting line, and it tells us something about the land of the Phaeacians. Balance is best in all things. Father Zeus, Athena, and Lord Apollo, there's your holy trinity of the Greeks, right? Zeus, Athena, Apollo. If only seeing the man you are, seeing we think as one, you could wed my daughter and be my son-in-law and stay right here with us. I'd give you a house and great wealth, if you choose to stay, that is. Notice very quickly, the king will be ready to offer Nausicaa to his stranger, to this stranger, new friend of his, right? Okay? No Phaeacian would hold you back by force. The curse of Father Zeus on such a thing. Anybody that would try to hold Odysseus back would be cursed by Zeus. that will be the suitor's right. And about your convoy home, you rest assured. I have chosen the day, and I decree it is tomorrow. And all that voyage long, you'll lie in a deep sleep while my people sail you on through calm and gentle tides. We'll sail you home, right? And he says, it's not a problem. We'll make sure that you get home in time. Odysseus then will pray to the god Zeus at line 380, Father Zeus on high, may the king fulfill his promise, one and all. Then his fame would ring through the fertile earth. That whole notion of kleos again, right? That idea of glory, right? And never die, and I should reach my native land at last. Then Mama will say, Aertes will say, hey, it's time. She's got him a good bed made, just like Achilles will make the great bed, have the bed made up for Priam at the end of the Iliad. She has a great bed, a great snug resting place, a good snug resting place. Up, friend, time for sleep. Your bed is made, she says. How welcome the thought of sleep to that man now. So there, after many trials, Odysseus lay at rest on a corded bed inside the echoing colonnade. Alcinous slept in chambers deep in his lofty house, where the queen, his wife, arranged and shared their bed. In other words, Alcinous has what Odysseus yet cannot have, sleeping in the same bed with his wife. Well, let's finish now at level 2 and 3. 2a, major messages possibly here. All of us, in some ways, this text seems to suggest, all of us long for Phaeacia. That is to say, El Dorado. That is to say, Eden. That is to say, paradise, or heaven on earth, right? A place where there's no conflict, a place where there's harmony. We'll come back to this idea when we study Plato's Republic and the quest for the ideal republic, right? Of course, another major message is here, even a hero must show some humility and ask for some help, even if it comes from a young girl, or in the case of the Queen Arete, a woman, right? Another interesting message is that fathers are always looking to marry off their daughters in Homer. Did you notice this? Right? So very quickly, Alcinous is ready to marry off his daughter. Of course, we think about Menelaus and Helen marrying off their daughter Hermione as well, right? Finally, of course, we mentioned it, we'll say it again. The question of identity, who are you, is a very interesting one. But notice, and this is, I think, significant to our reading of the Odyssey. If we said in our beginning of the study of epics that we are, as a people, as individuals, and as a group, we are the stories we tell, the stories we accept, the stories we reject. Think about this. When Odysseus is asked, who are you? He always responds with a story. Why? Because Odysseus is his story, in the same way that our identity is always tied up with the story of our life, where we've been and where we're going, right? At level 2b, the symbolism here, well, let's just say that Phaeacia is a symbol. It is a symbol of Eden, paradise on earth, El Dorado we mentioned, right? The irony in this book is, of course, that the Phaeacians will show incredible Zaina, right? That notion of, that idea of the guest-host relationship in Xenia, right? However, it's going to get them jacked for it. If Phaeacia is Eden-like, paradise-like, the showing of this Xenia to Odysseus will ultimately lead to them losing that Edenic kind of paradise, right? Zeus, ironically, demands Xenia, but Zeus allows Poseidon to ultimately jack the Phaeacians for showing that level of guest-host relationship in Xenia to Odysseus. Ironic. At 3a, well, we mentioned already so many comparisons to the Iliad. Think of it this way. Troy was once like the land of the Phaeacians. It was Edenic. It was like Eden. It was this amazing paradise, and it was lost. Another way to think of it is, of course, man's greed destroys Troy. And in this regards, we will have maybe some comparisons to be made with other texts. So, well, of course, this 3a question, what is the favorite texts of El Dorado or Phaeacia or Eden? We're going to meet several in our study in AP English. I'll just mention several. Obviously, if we're talking Eden, we have to talk about Milton's Paradise Lost. If we're talking El Dorado, we're going to be talking about Voltaire's Candide. Think as well when we meet Goethe's Faust, Assassin Faust number 2, this idea of trying to build the perfect world. We'll get there. Of course, in the British English literary tradition, it is Arthur's Camelot. We'll have more to say about that one later when we meet King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table. What for you is the video game that you play that somehow kind of pictures that perfect world? What is the movie that for you plays that game of the perfect world? And of course, how that perfect world can somehow be lost, right? Finally, at 3b, a couple of questions that are probably easily predictable. What is, for you, your Phaeacia, or your Eden, or your El Dorado? What's the perfect spot for you, okay, right now in your life? I mean, if there's one place that you like to go to try to get away from it all, what is that for you? And then, of course, what is a time when you had Phaeacia, you had Eden, you had El Dorado, you had this perfect place, and then you lost it? What was that for you? I once had a student that said that she totally understood this because she was living in this perfect place, and then her parents got, divorced, and she ended up having to move to another place, and everything was lost, everything was ruined. And she understands kind of the sense of that. She understood the sense of that. Okay, well, that brings us to the conclusion of Book 7. Let's now play in Book 8 the game of games. And in fact, that's exactly what we'll do. And we'll be referencing Iliad 23. Remember in the Iliad, after Patroclus has died and Achilles has fought Hector and killed Hector, you have this really interesting in Book 23, the games that Achilles will throw. Well, we're going to have something very similar now in Book 8, where Odysseus will be allowed to shine, which will ultimately lead to the question, who are you? Which will then allow for Odysseus to say, I will tell you my story, and that will, of course, be the famous books of 9 through 12, and we will, of course, get to that in a bit. I hope that your study is beneficial to you. Thank you.